behind the hay. Don't make a sound.
The first scream didn't sound human. Jake Marston reined in his horse, the desert wind swallowing the echo almost as soon as it rose. The sky was still dark, the first hint of dawn bleeding over the rim of the prairie. He'd been riding the far fence line, same as every morning, when that cry tore through the quiet like a knife through burlap. Then came another, this time a rasping, broken plea. "Please, help." Jake kicked his boots against the stirrups and bolted toward the sound. Sagebrush tore at his coat as he cut across the uneven field, scanning the ground. For a moment he thought coyotes had dragged someone off. Then he saw her. A woman in a torn black habit lay half buried in the dust, her fingers still clawing weakly at the earth as if trying to pull herself forward. Her face bloodied, bruised, and streaked with dirt, was far too young for that kind of injury. And her eyes, wide, terrified, darting at every movement around her. Jake jumped from the saddle before the horse fully stopped. "Miss, you hear me?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She flinched, curling in on herself. No, don't take me back. Please, he'll kill me." Jake froze. He'd heard fear before real fear. Whatever chased her wasn't imaginary. "All right," he said softly. "Ain't nobody tacking you anywhere. You're safe now." Her breathing hitched. She tried to speak, but the sound caught in her throat. When she finally forced the words out, they were barely a whisper. "It's the mission. They're lying to everyone. Sheriff Collins' Father Whitmore. They're not men of God." Jake felt the air shift. Collins, Whitmore. Two names powerful enough to own half the county and feared enough to rule the rest. The woman's trembling hand clamped weakly on his sleeve. "You have to believe me," she whispered. "They'll burn anyone who speaks. They burned her, the English sister. They'll do it again." Jake didn't know who she was talking about, not yet. But he knew one thing. Whatever nightmare she crawled from, it wasn't the kind that healed on its own. He lifted her carefully into his arms. "Name's Jake Marston," he said as he carried her toward his horse. "And whoever's after you, they just picked the wrong rancher to cross." Behind them, the prairie wind howled like something angry waking up. The sun was just clearing the ridge when Jake pushed open the door to his ranch house, carrying the wounded nun inside. Dust swirled in the golden light behind him, but he didn't bother shutting the door. Every second mattered now. He laid her on the old leather sofa and grabbed a canteen from the shelf. She was conscious, barely, but her eyes kept drifting in and out of focus, as if she were still running in her mind. "Drink slow," Jake said, holding the rim to her lips. The water hit her throat and she coughed violently, then tried again. Color began to return to her cheeks. She wiped her mouth with a shaking hand, attempting to compose herself, though fear still clung to every part of her. "I'm Sister Eliza," she murmured. "I figured you were part of the mission," Jake replied. Didn't figure the mission was the kind of place folks had to run from. At that, her expression tightened. She struggled to sit up, leaning heavily against the sofa arm. "You don't understand," she said. "They took vows, yes, but not the kind anyone should take. Father Whitmore and Sheriff Collins, they've built something foul. They use God's name like a shield, something to hide behind while they do whatever they want." Jake felt a familiar anger stir. He'd seen powerful men hide behind uniforms and titles before. He'd buried friends because of men like that. What exactly did they do? He asked. Eliza swallowed hard. The English sister Margaret. She was new, innocent. She started noticing things. Questions about church funds, about the girls placed in the mission's care, about late-night visits from the sheriff. Eliza's breathing quickened. She confronted Whitmore, and 2 days later, they said she fell ill, but I saw them. I saw them dragging her out behind the mission barn at night. Heard her pleading, demanding they tell the truth. She squeezed her eyes shut. They silenced her, and they were coming for me next. Jake's jaw tightened. You're saying Collins is in on all this? He does the threats, the disappearances. Whitmore tells the town everything's fine. And the people believe him, because why wouldn't they? He's the man holding their Sunday prayers. Jake paced the room, boots creaking on the wood. Collins was more than a sheriff. He was a man who viewed fear as a currency. And Whitmore, if half of what she said was true, the town had no idea what monster stood at their altar. Eliza looked up at him, voice trembling. If they discover I escaped, they won't stop. Not until I'm dead. Jake stopped pacing. Then we make damn sure they don't find you first. His voice was steady, but a shadow crossed his thoughts. Because if Collins learned she was with him, the hunt wouldn't just be for her. It would be for them both. Eliza drifted into an uneasy sleep, but Jake didn't. He stood by the window, watching the empty road curl toward town like a dry riverbed. The silence outside wasn't comforting. It felt staged, like something holding its breath. He lit the stove, made coffee, and kept a rifle leaning against the table leg. Not because he wanted trouble, but because trouble had a habit of finding men like him the moment they tried to do something right. By mid-morning, a thin column of dust rose on the horizon. Jake stiffened. Only one thing made a trail like that: horses moving fast. Too fast for ranch hands, too direct for travelers, and far too early for the mail coach. He stepped onto the porch and shaded his eyes. 3 riders. One of them rode with the lazy confidence of a man who believed the land belonged to him. Sheriff Collins. Jake's pulse steadied. Fear didn't do a man any good now. The riders stopped 10 yards from the porch. Collins tipped his hat, though the gesture carried no courtesy. The other 2 deputies fanned out slightly, hands too close to their holsters to be casual. "Mornin', Marston," Collins said, voice smooth as a greased hinge. "Heard someone saw you ridin' the north fields before sunrise. Figured I'd check on you." Jake folded his arms. "Fence needed mendin'. Didn't know that was something you'd be interested in." Collins smiled, but his eyes stayed cold. "Funny thing. Mission reported a missing sister today. Fragile little thing. Seems she wandered off during the night." He leaned forward in the saddle. "You didn't happen to see anyone out there, did ya?" Jake held his stare without blinking. "Saw a whole lot of dust. Saw my cattle. Didn't see none." That earned a slow, thoughtful nod. Collins chewed the inside of his cheek, studying. Jake the way a coyote studies a closed chicken coop looking for weak boards. "Well," Collins drawled, "if you do see something, you let me know. Father Whitmore's awful torn up about it. Says she weren't in the right state of mind. Might hurt herself if she ain't found." Jake didn't answer. He didn't trust what might slip out if he did. Collins tugged his reins, preparing to turn away. "Be careful out here, Marston. Lots of strange things happening lately. Best keep an eye open." As the riders galloped off, Jake waited until the dust settled before he exhaled. He walked back inside. Eliza slept fitfully, unaware of the danger that had just stopped at his door. Jake set the rifle on the table. They didn't have much time now. Jake didn't wake Eliza until the sun had begun its slow crawl toward evening. She stirred with a start, eyes wild, hands grasping at the air as though still running from the shadows that chased her through the night. "It's all right," Jake said, steadying her shoulder. "You're safe. For now." The last 2 words hung in the air like dust motes light, but impossible to ignore. He handed her a piece of cornbread and a cup of water. She ate slowly, as if each bite reminded her she was still alive. But even in her exhaustion, her mind stayed sharp, darting back to fear at the smallest creak of the house. "We can't stay here," Jake said at last. Collins came by. Her hand froze midair. "Did he see me?" "No, and he ain't sure you came this way. But he's suspicious now. And suspicion is enough for a man like him." Eliza pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "He won't stop. Not until he finds me or kills the truth." Jake nodded. "Which is why we're moving you to the barn. Loft up there's hidden. No one finds it unless they're looking real hard." They waited until dusk, when the sky dimmed and shadows stretched long across the ranch. Jake carried supplies first: blankets, water, a lantern with a cloth over it to dull the light. Then he helped Eliza walk, supporting her weight as they crossed the yard. Each step seemed to strain her, though she refused to ask him to slow. The barn door groaned softly as Jake pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of hay, dust, and old wood, safer than the open world, but still too exposed for comfort. "I'll get you settled," Jake said, climbing the ladder first. He reached down and helped her ascend, one trembling step at a time, until she collapsed softly onto the straw-covered boards. Eliza looked around the dim loft. This will do." "Thank you." Jake knelt beside her. "Tell me more about what they're hiding. The more I know, the better I can help." For a long moment she said nothing. Then, her voice barely above a breath, she began. "Margaret kept records. She wrote everything she saw: the bruises on the younger girls who came to the mission, the money Whitmore hid in separate ledgers, the night Collins brought, a man beaten half to death to the back entrance." Eliza's eyes glistened. "She made copies, hid them. Whitmore found out." Jake's heart thudded. "Copies? Where?" "I don't know," Eliza whispered. "But Margaret said if anything happened to her, the truth would still be found." Jake leaned back, mind racing. Records, ledgers, proof. They weren't just fighting fear. They were fighting evidence someone had died to protect. Night settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket, muffling sound and thought alike. Jake remained in the lower part of the barn, leaning against a support beam, lantern dimmed to a faint orange glow. Above him, Eliza lay curled in the loft, finally resting, not peacefully, but at least still. Jake sorted through her words again and again, turning them over the same way a rancher checks a stone stuck in a horse's shoe. Margaret's hidden records. A trail of corruption Whitmore and Collins couldn't afford anyone finding. If copies existed, someone else might know. Someone Margaret trusted. Someone still alive. Jake suddenly stood straighter. There was one person. Old Carson, the former mission caretaker. He'd been dismissed months ago quietly, almost secretly. Folks thought he left for health reasons, but Jake remembered seeing the man limping through town with a bandage at his temple. The kind of wound that didn't come from old age. If Margaret confided in anyone at the mission, it would have been him. Jake climbed the ladder and whispered, "Eliza." She stirred, blinking down at him with tired, hollow eyes. "You mentioned Margaret hid copies. Do you know if she ever spoke to Carson?" "The old caretaker." Eliza's breath caught. "Carson." "Yes. He helped her more than once. She trusted him. But after she confronted Whitmore, he disappeared. People said he left town." Jake shook his head. "He didn't leave. He's living near the river canyon. Barely talks to anyone." Hope flickered across her features, thin, fragile, but real. "Jake, if he has the records, then Whitmore and Collins fall," Jake finished. "But we gotta reach him first." A sudden creak outside snapped both their heads toward the barn door. Jake killed the lantern instantly. Darkness swallowed everything. Footsteps, quiet, too careful. Jake's hand slid to the revolver on his belt. Eliza whispered from above, "Is it them?" "Don't move," Jake murmured. He crept toward the thin gap in the boards. Someone moved outside, silhouette low, deliberate, scanning the barn's perimeter. Not a rancher, not a traveler, a deputy. Jake recognized the outline of the hat, the stance, the cautious way he circled like a wolf, sniffing out a rabbit hole. The deputy paused, listening, then stepped toward the door. Jake cocked his revolver silently. The barn held its breath. The deputy tugged on the handle. Once, twice, a test. Then, satisfied or maybe unsure, he backed away. After several long seconds, the footsteps faded into the night. Jake didn't move for a full minute. Only after silence returned did he climb to the loft. "They know," Eliza whispered. "They're searching everywhere." Jake nodded grimly. "Then we ride at dawn. We find Carson. And we find the truth before they find you." Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the barn like a warning. Tomorrow, the hunt would begin. And not everyone would survive it. Jake saddled the horses long before dawn touched the horizon. The stars still hung overhead, sharp, cold, unblinking, watching as he worked in near silence. Only the soft snort of his mare and the whisper of leather straps broke the stillness. Eliza waited inside the barn, wrapped in Jake's old coat, her hands trembling, not from the morning chill but from the weight of what they were about to do. When Jake stepped inside, she rose immediately. "Is it time?" she asked. Jake nodded. "We need to reach Carson before Collins figures out where he is. Or worse, gets to him first." Eliza swallowed hard. "If they knew Margaret trusted him, they'd make sure he never talked," Jake finished grimly. He helped her mount the smaller chestnut mare, gentle, steady, less likely to jolt her already bruised body. She winced as she swung her leg over the saddle, but she didn't complain. Fear sharpened resolve like a whetstone. They rode out with no lantern, letting the dim starlight guide their way. The ranch faded behind them, swallowed by the landscape. Up ahead stretched miles of open ground, sagebrush plains, dry washes, distant ridges. And beyond those ridges lay the river canyon, where Carson hid himself from the world. The air was cold enough to sting. Jake stole glances at Eliza, making sure she didn't fall or faint. But she held on with a determination far stronger than her frail appearance suggested. "Jake," she said quietly after some time, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "Do you think Margaret knew they would kill her?" Jake hesitated. "Hard to say. Some folks speak up knowing the cost. Others don't think monsters walk around wearing a priest's collar." Eliza shuddered. She only wanted to protect the girls. "Then we're gonna finish what she started." They reached the old wagon trail leading toward the canyon. The sky was turning a pale blue, signaling the first hint of sunrise. That was dangerous daylight, meant they could be spotted from miles away. Jake slowed his horse, scanning the horizon. He knew enough about being hunted to recognize when eyes were on him. But the land remained still, silent, except for the rustle of dry grass. Eliza touched the rosary hidden beneath her coat. "Do you think Carson will tell us everything?" "If he knows what's good for him," Jake muttered. "But Carson ain't a coward. Whitmore tried to break him once. Didn't succeed." As the canyon cut deeper into view, the terrain shifted. Rocks jutted from the earth like jagged teeth, and the air cooled. Birds circled overhead, vultures, mostly waiting for something to die. Eliza gripped the reins tighter. "Jake, do you ever feel like something is following us?" Jake didn't answer right away, because he did. And the feeling was getting stronger. The canyon swallowed sound as Jake and Eliza descended along the narrow path carved by decades of floodwaters. The walls rose steep on both sides, streaked with ochre and gray, turning the world into a long stone corridor. Jake kept his hand near the rifle sling. This kind of terrain worked both ways. You could hide easy, but so could anyone hunting you. Carson's shack came into view at the base of the canyon, perched beside a bend in the shallow river. The structure looked half-collapsed, boards warped, roof sagging. Smoke trickled faintly from a crooked chimney, thin, hesitant, like whoever lived inside wanted the world to think they weren't home. Jake stopped his horse behind a cluster of boulders. "Stay here," he whispered. Eliza didn't argue. Her eyes were fixed on the shack with a mix of hope and fear. Hope that Carson was alive, fear that he wasn't. Jake approached on foot, boots quiet on the sand. When he reached the porch, he knocked once, firm, steady. At first, nothing. Then a tired voice rasped from inside. "Go away." "Carson," Jake called softly. "It's Marston. I need to talk." A heavy pause followed. Then a shuffling of steps. The door creaked open a few inches, revealing a gaunt, gray-bearded man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You shouldn't be here," Carson whispered harshly. "They'll follow you." "They already are," Jake said. "We need your help." Carson's gaze flicked past Jake toward the canyon path, then to the horses where Eliza waited. Recognition hit him like a blow. His face tightened. "She made it out?" he croaked. Eliza slid off her horse and approached slowly. "Carson, Margaret trusted you." The old man's expression broke grief, guilt, and something like relief washing over him all at once. He opened the door wider. "Get inside, quick." The shack's interior was cramped but orderly. Books stacked in leaning towers, papers stuffed into crates, a small oil lamp burning low. Carson locked the door behind them and drew the curtains shut. "I knew this day would come," he muttered. "Margaret. She said someone would survive long enough to seek me out." Eliza stepped closer. "The records, did she give them to you?" Carson nodded slowly. "She did. And I hid them where Whitmore's dogs would never search." He bent down, pried up a loose floorboard, and pulled out a wrapped bundle of journals, letters, and ledgers. "Everything is in here. Proof of beatings, theft, threats. And of what Collins did that night." Jake felt a cold weight settle in his gut. "Then we have what we need." Carson shook his head. "You have more than that. You have targets on your backs. Whitmore knows someone helped Margaret. Collins knows you're hiding the girl. They'll burn this canyon to ash to stop the truth." As if summoned by his words, a distant echo thundered through the canyon hooves. Fast, many. Eliza's face drained of color. Jake grabbed his rifle. "They found us." The sound of galloping hooves ricocheted off the canyon walls, multiplying until it seemed an entire army was bearing down on them. Jake moved first, swift, controlled, already calculating the terrain. There were only two exits from Carson's shack, the front door and the narrow back path leading deeper into the canyon. Neither one offered much hope. "Carson," Jake said, loading a fresh round into his rifle, "how many ways in or out of this place?" Carson grabbed the battered revolver from a shelf. "Only the river pass, but it narrows too damn much. A man tries it on horseback, he'll break his neck. On foot? Maybe. Then we go on foot," Jake said. Eliza clutched the bundle of Margaret's records to her chest. "If they catch us." "They won't," Jake cut in, his voice iron steady, even though adrenaline hammered through him. "Move." Carson doused the lamp, plunging the shack into dim morning gray shadows. The three of them slipped, out the back door just as the first. Silhouettes appeared. Atop the canyon ridge, deputies, rifles slung across their backs, scanning the ground like hunters who already smelled blood. Jake led the way along the river, its thin trickle cutting a winding path through the canyon floor. The water darkened their boots and muffled their steps. Behind them, voices rose, calling, shouting orders, men fanning out. "Spread wide." "She's here. I know she's here." Eliza flinched at the sound of his voice. Jake placed a steadying hand on her arm. The canyon gradually tightened. the walls closing in until the sky overhead became nothing more than a narrow ribbon. Carson limped faster than Jake expected for a man his age, his breath wheezing but determined. Fear had a way of lending strength. They reached the start of the river pass, a narrow crack between two massive boulders. It was barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through at a time. Jake pushed Carson forward. Go. Carson slid into the gap, scraping his arms on the rock. Eliza followed, clutching the records, her breath sharp with panic. Jake was halfway through when the first gunshot cracked through the canyon. Shards of stone exploded beside him. "Jake!" Eliza cried, reaching back through the narrow opening. "I'm fine," he grunted, pulling himself through the rest of the way. Another bullet ricocheted off the rocks behind him, sending sparks into the air. On the other side, the canyon widened again, but not by much. Twisted dead trees leaned over the riverbed, and jagged stones offered cover, if only for a minute. Carson pointed ahead. "There's a cave. Not far. We can lose them in the rock maze." Jake nodded. "Move, they're close." Behind them, Collins's voice bellowed, "Bring me the girl alive. The others do what you want." The words echoed like a curse, and the chase began again. Jake pushed Eliza and Carson ahead while he covered their backs, firing short, controlled shots toward the canyon bend. The deputies scattered behind rocks, their shouts bouncing off the stone walls like angry spirits. Each echo made it impossible to tell exactly where the next bullet would come from. "Keep moving," Jake yelled. Carson limped as fast as his battered leg allowed, breath ragged, eyes wide with the grim certainty of a man who'd lived too long with fear. Eliza held Margaret's record so tightly her knuckles turned white, but she didn't slow, not even when a bullet sliced a chip of rock inches from her head. The cave appeared ahead, a ragged hole in the canyon wall, half hidden by a pile of dead brush and a leaning cedar trunk. Jake grabbed Eliza's arm and dragged her inside first. Carson stumbled in after her. Jake followed, pulling branches to obscure the entrance. Darkness swallowed them whole. The only sound inside was the rapid breathing of three people who knew death was standing just outside. "Stay quiet," Jake whispered. "Sound travels in here." Eliza nodded, though tears glimmered in her eyes. Carson collapsed onto a rock, clutching his revolver with trembling fingers. Outside, the deputies' footsteps crunched along the riverbed. "Fan out," Collins called. "They're close, I can feel it." His voice seeped into the cave like poison. Eliza pressed a hand against her mouth to keep from making a sound. Jake steadied her shoulder, then motioned deeper into the darkness. The cave wound inward like the throat of some ancient creature. Narrow passages branched left and right, creating a labyrinth of jagged stone. Old miners had carved some of it decades ago. The rest had been shaped by time itself. Jake led them through the narrowest gaps, trusting instinct more than memory. Carson whispered, barely audible, "They'll follow us." "Collins ain't stupid." "Maybe not," Jake said. "But he's angry. Angry men make mistakes." They reached a wider chamber, where pale light dripped through cracks in the ceiling. Here, the walls glimmered faintly with mineral dust, giving the cavern an eerie silver glow. Eliza leaned against the stone. "Jake, how long can we hide?" "As long as we need to," Jake answered. But he knew hiding wouldn't solve anything. Not with Collins hunting them like wounded prey. Voices echoed through the tunnels closer now. Jake raised his rifle. Carson touched his arm. "We can't keep running. You know that." Jake met the old man's eyes. Carson was right. They had Margaret's records. They had proof. They just needed a way to survive long enough to use it. Eliza stepped forward, trembling but resolute. "If we escape this, we expose them in front of the whole town. No more shadows." Jake nodded slowly. "Then we make our stand smart." The echoes grew louder, footsteps entering the cave. Jake chambered around, breath steady. The moment they come into view, he whispered, we end this on our terms. They escaped the canyon just before dusk, bruised, exhausted, and still alive only because Collins and his men lost their way in the cave labyrinth. Jake recognized the moment the echoes of pursuit finally faded when the air shifted, and only the distant wind filled the silence behind them. They didn't stop until the canyon walls fell away and the prairie opened before them, wide, empty, and indifferent. Carson bent over, hands bracing his knees. We got lucky. Jake shook his head. Luck runs out. We need more than that now. Eliza held the bundle of records tight against her chest, as if they were the only thing keeping her standing. Jake, how do we make the town believe us? Whitmore controls half of them. Collins controls the rest. We don't need them to believe us right away, Jake replied. We just need them to hear the truth where Whitmore can't shut it down. Carson wiped sweat and dust from his brow. The only place that's public enough is the square. The well ceremony tomorrow, everyone will be there. Jake looked at him sharply. Ceremony? A blessing, Carson said with a bitter twist of his mouth. Whitmore's favorite show. He'll stand on the steps of the mission and preach about purity and obedience, while Collins prowls the crowd. It's perfect. Eliza's breath trembled. Perfect for us. Or for them. For us, Jake said. If Whitmore wants a crowd, we'll give him one. And we'll give him something he can't drown in scripture. They rode through the night, skirting the road to avoid running into deputies. The lights of Dodge City flickered in the distance, warm, familiar, and yet suddenly tainted with the knowledge of what lived within its walls. Jake felt something tighten in his chest as they approached. He'd known this town his whole life, but tonight it felt like enemy territory. They reached the outskirts at dawn. Smoke curled from chimneys. Merchants prepared their stalls. People began to gather near the mission, oblivious to the storm heading their way. Jake pulled his horse behind an abandoned livery stable. We go on foot from here, and we stick together. Eliza nodded, though fear danced in her eyes. Carson handled the records carefully, as if holding dynamite. They slipped into the crowd quietly. Jake scanned every face, every badge, every shadow. Collins's deputies were already posted leaning against buildings, pretending to look casual. Wolves in plain sight. Eliza took a shaky breath. Jake! Once this starts, there's no turning back. Jake laid a steady hand on her shoulder. Good, because turning back never fixed anything. The mission bell rang overhead. Whitmore stepped onto the platform, and the moment of reckoning began. Whitmore's voice rose above the murmurs of the gathered townsfolk, preaching about devotion, charity, and the sanctity of the mission. His words, polished and rehearsed, carried authority. Collins stood nearby, chest puffed, a smirk playing on his lips. They believed no one could challenge them in this public spectacle. Jake, Eliza, and Carson positioned themselves at the back of the crowd, hidden among the merchants and early arriving townspeople. Eliza's hands shook as she held Margaret's records, but her eyes burned with determination. The papers contained everything: the beatings, the embezzlement, the threats, the abuses, all neatly documented. The truth had a weight heavier than any gun. Jake leaned close. When I nod, you step forward. Eliza swallowed and nodded. Her heart raced. Fear and courage warred within her. Carson's eyes flipped between the platform and the crowd, his face pale but resolute. They won't silence you now, he whispered. Jake scanned the square. Whitmore's disciples, the town officials, and ordinary citizens filled every corner. Some faces were curious, some wary, but all were expectant. Whitmore gestured toward the mission, raising his hands in a display of false piety. The moment had come. Jake gave the subtle nod. Eliza stepped forward, clutching the bundle of records. The crowd stirred, puzzled by the sudden movement. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "I have something to share," Eliza's voice, though trembling, carried through the square. "Something no one has dared to reveal until now." Gasps spread. The congregation shifted uneasily. Whitmore's confident posture faltered. Collins tensed, recognizing the girl from the mission, the one he thought he'd control. Eliza began unwrapping the records. These documents were kept by Sister Margaret, who tried to expose the crimes hidden in this mission. Whitmore, the priest, and Sheriff Collins used faith as a shield to hide abuse, theft, and violence against the innocent. Jake stepped beside her, hand resting on the rifle at his side, not for threat, but as a reminder they wouldn't back down. Carson distributed copies of the records to several merchants and witnesses, ensuring no single person could destroy all evidence. The murmurs escalated into uproar. Citizens read, whispered, and pointed. Whitmore's voice faltered. Collins barked orders, but confusion had taken hold. A few deputies tried to intervene, but the town now demanded answers. Citizens surrounded the platform, shouting for the truth. Whitmore's face went pale. "This is lies," he barked. Jake stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "No lies. The truth was hidden too long. Now everyone sees it." Collins, seeing the tide of the crowd turn, paled and finally stammered, unable to maintain control. Townspeople called for lawmen to act. Sheriff deputies tried to resist, but it was too late. The square was alive with justice. Dust exploded from the ground as 5 riders thundered over the ridge, their silhouettes sharp against the burning afternoon sun. Silas Rennan didn't flinch. He simply tightened the leather strap on his old horse's saddle, pretending not to notice the cloud of trouble racing straight toward him. But he heard them hooves pounding like war drums, voices barking orders, metal clanking with impatience. The lead rider, Von Decker, yanked his horse to a harsh stop so close that gravel sprayed across Silas's boots. "Thought we made ourselves clear yesterday," Von growled. "You've got until sundown to leave this land." Silas didn't lift his head. "This land's been mine longer than you've been alive." The rest of the gang spread out, tightening the circle. One rider kicked over Silas's water bucket. Another spat at the dirt near his feet. Their intimidation wasn't subtle. They wanted him scared. They wanted him desperate. But Silas kept working like they weren't even there. That calm, that strange and quiet defiance, made Von's eye twitch. "You deaf, old man?" Von snapped. "We're taking this land. You leave now, or we make you leave." Still no answer. Silas finally picked up his tools, walked past them, and headed for his cabin. The gang followed, jeering and mocking with every step. Then they saw it. The laughing stopped mid-breath. Carved deep into the wooden doorframe of Silas's cabin was a symbol-sharp lines, woven shapes, ancient geometry. A mark that seemed to pulse even in the still air. Vaughn stared at it, lips parting, the color draining from his face. "No," he muttered. That's Cherokee." One of the riders swallowed hard. "The protection sigil, isn't it?" Silas paused in the doorway, finally meeting their eyes. "My wife carved it years ago," he said softly. "Said it'd keep danger away." The gang exchanged nervous looks. Every local knew what the symbol meant. Crossing a protected threshold didn't just break. A rule that invoked the tribe itself. And the Cherokee were not known for forgiving trespassers. But Vaughn, desperate to hold on to his authority, forced a scoff. "Old superstition," he said, though his voice cracked. "A mark won't save you." Silas didn't answer. He didn't have to. From the distant tree line came a single echo like a hawk's cry, sharp and deliberate. Every rider froze. They knew that sound. And they knew who made it. The riders stiffened as the piercing cry echoed again, this time closer, much closer. The sound rolled across Silas's land like a warning carried by the wind, settling into the bones of every man in Vaughn's gang. Horses stamped nervously, tossing their heads, sensing what their riders refused to acknowledge aloud. Silas stood calm on his porch, one hand resting near the carved Cherokee mark as though he were greeting an old friend. His eyes, however, remained fixed on the tree line behind the gang. He didn't smile, didn't gloat, just waited. And that quiet waiting unnerved Vaughn more than the cry itself. "Spread out," Vaughn snapped, though his voice held more fear than command. Probably just a bird, but none of the men obeyed. Their attention was glued to the thick line of oaks swaying far more than the gentle breeze should allow. Branches rustled as though something pressed through them, no many somethings. Heavy, deliberate footfalls thudded beneath the canopy. Shapes flickered between the trunks, indistinct but undeniably human. "Vaughn," one rider whispered, leaning closer. "We were told not to touch anything marked Cherokee." "You were told a lot of nonsense," Vaughn hissed. "Superstitions to scare off idiots." Yet his hand hovered near his holster, indecisive, the worst sign of all. A figure stepped into view between two oaks, just a silhouette at first, tall, still, watching. Then another figure appeared. Then two more, each carrying long boughs, their feathers catching the light like thin slashes of white fire. The riders saw enough to understand exactly who stood there. "Cherokee scouts," a rider breathed. The air seemed to thicken, the world shrinking, to the stretch of dirt between the gang and the advancing figures. The scouts didn't move closer. They simply stood guard, as if announcing that the land was no longer defenseless. "You summoned them," Vaughn said sharply, turning toward Silas. "How? How'd you contact them so fast?" "I didn't," Silas replied. "They always watch their marks." "Always have." As if on cue, one scout raised his hand, palm outward, an unmistakable signal: stand down or be dealt with. The gang's formation wavered instantly. Even Vaughn's horse took a step back. Panic rippled through them like electricity. These weren't hired guns. These were warriors bound by oath, culture, and sacred tradition. Men who did not bluff. Vaughn clenched his jaw. "We're not leaving." Not yet, but the tremor in his voice betrayed everything. Silas looked past him to the trees again. More shadows were gathering. A reckoning was walking straight toward them. The forest parted with slow, deliberate intention. Not a charge, not an ambush, something far more unsettling. The Cherokee warriors emerged one by one, silent as nightfall, yet carrying the presence of the storm. Their braided hair, eagle feather ornaments, and dark leather garments contrasted sharply against the pale light of the dust-filled air. The riders instinctively backed up, but the warriors didn't advance. They simply formed a line, a living wall, each man holding either a carved bough or a short-bladed hatchet. At their center walked a much older figure, taller, heavier, wrapped in a deep red mantle, decorated with patterns that looked as old as the soil itself. Silas felt his breath tighten. He hadn't expected him. Dakota, chief of the Crimson Ridge, Cherokee. He stopped several paces away from Silas's porch, lowering his head with solemn respect. "Brother," Dakota said. "We saw the mark disturbed." Silas nodded. "Not by my doing." Dakota shifted his attention toward Vaughn's gang, who now looked like boys pretending at manhood. Even Vaughn himself seemed smaller under the chief's gaze, his bravado bleeding out through the cracks in his thinning courage. "Who among you touched what is sacred?" Dakota asked calmly. No one answered. Not because they were loyal to one another, but because fear had sealed their throats shut. Sweat trickled down faces suddenly pale. Horses sidestepped and snorted anxiously. Dakota raised his voice slightly. 5 riders came onto the land of a man under our protection. They threatened him. They sought to take what is his by right and promise. If this is untrue, speak. Finally, Vaughn found his voice. We didn't know he was connected. You knew the mark, Dakota replied. Ignorance is not your refuge. Vaughn tried to straighten up. Look, nobody got hurt. We can just leave. Dakota stepped forward, and instantly 3 warriors mirrored him like reflections. You trespassed on a protected home. You threatened blood. You dishonored the memory of the woman who carved that symbol. Silas swallowed hard, hearing the mention of Alara, his late wife, spoken with such weight. Dakota continued, and now the price must be paid. So this land remains in balance. Vaughn's jaw tightened. What price? A long silence. Then Dakota pointed at the ground before them. You will be judged by the tribe, not by your guns, not by your threats, but by your actions. And you will repair what you damaged. Several riders trembled visibly. And, Dakota added with the finality of a falling axe, you will speak the truth of this offense at every trading post, so all know the weight of shame. A ripple of panic spread through the gang. Dakota didn't threaten them. He sentenced them. The wind dropped to a dead, eerie stillness after Dakota delivered his judgment. It felt as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see whether Vaughn's gang would obey or choose the foolish path. The riders shifted uneasily in their saddles, glancing between Silas's cabin, the warriors, and their increasingly panicked leader. Silas watched with a heavy calm. He wasn't eager for vengeance, only for safety. But he knew better than anyone that once the Cherokee declared a verdict, no force on earth could undo it. Not bullets, not threats, not stubborn pride. Vaughn rubbed the back of his neck, clearly rattled. He opened his mouth to argue, then shut it again when he saw the line of warriors tighten. Even the horses began to sense the danger. One reared slightly before its rider yanked the reins down. Let's just ride out of here, one of Vaughn's men whispered. They can't chase all of us. Dakota didn't have to say anything. His raised eyebrow alone made the man shrink. You will not leave, the chief said, his tone low but carrying across the open field like a command written in stone. You will face the balance you disturbed. Vaughn spat into the dirt, desperate to reclaim some authority. What if we refuse? You'll kill us? That it? One of the warriors stepped forward at that, his expression unreadable. We do not harm without cause. But if you flee justice, then your fear becomes your punishment. Another cry echoed from the forest, short, sharp, unmistakably a signal. More warriors appeared. Not in a formation, not in a show of intimidation. They arrived the way a tide advances, silently, unstoppably, filling every open space until the gang was completely surrounded. Vaughn's bravado crumbled. The men exchanged looks of dread as the circle tightened. Silas could feel the tension like a pulse in the air. This wasn't violence, it was a reminder that the Cherokee didn't need bullets to hold power. Their unity alone was enough. Dakota crossed his arms. The land remembers every step taken upon it. Today, it remembers yours. And so will every traveler who hears the truth at the trading posts. The gang's shoulders slumped. Their fate was sealed, and they all knew it. But something else stirred in Silas, a flicker of memory, sharp enough to sting. Alara, his wife, carving the mark on their door with her gentle hands. It's not just protection, she had told him. It's a promise, a bond. If anything happens to you, my people will come. He had believed her, of course, but he had never imagined this. The warriors moved again, shifting their formation, making space in the center. Dakota pointed to the ground. Dismount. Nobody moved. Then Dakota gave a single nod. In an instant, the warriors raised their bows, not aiming to kill, but to remind. Arrows pointed at their boots, their reins, their stirrups. The message was unmistakable. Comply, or the next signal will not be a warning. Vaughn exhaled shakily. The riders stood in a loose, frightened cluster, their horses held by Cherokee warriors who guided the animals with calm precision. Vaughn towered over his men, but his confidence had evaporated. Sweat streaked down his temples despite the cooling air, and his eyes darted constantly between Dakota and the tree line, as if hoping for an escape that didn't exist. Dakota's voice cut through the silence. You damaged the home of a man protected by our tribe. You threatened his life. You attempted to take what was not yours. These offenses demand restoration. One of Vaughn's men groaned softly. We didn't even touch the cabin, just tried to scare him a little. Silas finally spoke. A little? He stepped forward, boots hitting the porch steps with steady weight. You fired near my barn. You rode your horses through my irrigation line. You broke my fence. You scared my animals into the hills. His tone didn't rise, didn't shake. It didn't need to. Every word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Dakota nodded. You will begin by repairing the land you harmed. The warriors handed the gang small bundles of tools, axes, rope, wooden posts, leather gloves worn thin from years of use. Vaughn stared at the items as if they were foreign objects. You expect us to fix his busted fence? He said, incredulous. Yes, Dakota answered simply. By your hands the harm was done. By your hands it will be undone. Silas folded his arms. And you'll do it right. You break something, you fix it. The warriors split the gang into pairs, guiding them toward the damaged sections along the property. Their protests faded quickly under the silent presence of the Cherokee. Every misstep was met with a watchful gaze. Every sloppy repair earned a quiet correction. As they worked, the Cherokee formed a wide perimeter, ensuring no one wandered. They weren't guards. They were witnesses ensuring balance, upholding the pact. Silas stood beside Dakota, watching the repairs unfold. The chief's expression was unreadable, but there was a softness around his eyes that Silas remembered from long ago. You came because of her, Silas said quietly. Dakota nodded. Alara was our sister. Her bond to you became ours. Silas swallowed, his throat tightening. It's been years. I didn't expect anyone to still honor that. Dakota placed a hand over his chest. We honor all who keep their word. She loved you. That alone commanded our loyalty. Silas looked away, blinking hard. Meanwhile, Vaughn slammed a post into the ground, panting with frustration. This is ridiculous. We're doing farm chores. A nearby warrior glanced at him. Restoring what you broke is not a chore. It is justice. The sun dipped lower as the gang worked, sweat soaking their shirts, hands blistering. Not one dared attempt escape. The Cherokee didn't need to threaten, they simply existed, unmovable, unshackable, a force older than every man standing there. By late afternoon, the field shimmered with heat, a wavering haze floating above the ground as Vaughn's gang continued their forced labor. Every man was drenched in sweat, shirts sticking to their backs, hands smeared with dirt and splinters. The once broken fence now stood straight and long, unbroken lines ragged in places, but functional. And more importantly, built by those who had shattered it. Silas watched quietly from beneath the shade of a tall pine. A mix of emotions warred inside him. Satisfaction, yes, because justice was finally served. But also a twinge of pity. These were grown men who had lived by intimidation their whole lives. Now they were being humbled in the most painful way possible, through honest work. Dakota approached him, moving with the calm, deliberate grace of a man shaped by tradition. The work goes well, he noted. But this is only the first part. Silas nodded slowly. The telling of the tale? Dakota's eyes narrowed slightly. Yes, their shame must travel farther than their footsteps. A lesson unspoken is a lesson soon repeated. In the distance, Vaughn drove a final stake into the ground, then leaned heavily on it, chest heaving. The other riders were in similar states, barely standing, gasping for breath. Their horses grazed quietly nearby, guarded by 2 Cherokee scouts who didn't look away even once. One of Vaughn's men muttered, "We fixed the damn fence. Isn't that enough?" A warrior beside him simply shook his head. No. A sudden gust of wind rippled across the field. The air shifted. Birds scattered from the treetops. The Cherokee sensed something before even Silas caught it, one of those subtle moments where nature itself seemed to lean in. Dakota turned toward the cabin. "It is time." He gestured for the gang to gather in the center of the field. The riders trudged reluctantly into formation, shoulders slumped, eyes bleak. They looked like prisoners awaiting a verdict they already knew. Dakota faced them with calm authority. "You have repaired the damage you caused, but your threats traveled farther than broken wood. You whispered fear into this land. Such poison must be drawn out." Vaughn clenched his fists, jaw tight. "And what exactly does that mean?" Dakota lifted his chin. "You will speak the truth of your wrongdoing at the trading posts. You will declare your shame publicly. And you will name Silas Rennan as the man you wronged." A murmur of outrage rippled through the gang. "No way. You can't make us. This is humiliating." Dakota held up a single hand. Silence fell instantly. "You carried pride into this land. Now you will carry humility." Silas felt the weight of those words settle like dust on his shoulders. He had never asked for such a punishment, but he understood it. Out here, reputation was everything. Humiliation traveled faster than wildfire. For Vaughn's gang, this was a sentence worse than jail. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky a burnished gold as Dakota prepared the next stage of judgment. Silas remained on the edge of the clearing while the warriors guided the gang toward a long, wooden bench near the cabin a place Alara once used to dry herbs. Now it served a different purpose, a place where truth would be extracted. Vaughn scowled as he was seated, arms crossed like a rebellious schoolboy. The others sat more reluctantly, their bodies sagging with exhaustion. Their earlier bravado had faded, replaced with a hollow silence. Dakota stood before them, his shadow long and unwavering. He carried no weapon, none were needed. His authority alone commanded obedience. "In Cherokee law," he said, "a wrong must be spoken aloud to lose its power. A lie hidden rots the spirit, but a truth admitted cleanses the ground." He pointed to the first rider, a younger man with freckles and shaking hands. "You will speak." The man swallowed. "Speak what?" "What you did. Why you came. And why it was wrong." The rider looked at his boots, humiliation burning through him. After several long seconds, he rasped, "We came to force the old man off his land." Vaughn said it'd be easy. Dakota nodded once. "Continue." "And I shouldn't have come. We shouldn't have threatened him. It wasn't our right." His voice cracked on the last word. The Cherokee did not react. They simply let the confession hang in the air, settling into the dirt like a fallen leaf. The next rider was called. Then the next. Each repeated some variation of the truth, some reluctantly, some with tears of frustration, some with anger choked down by fear. But every confession chipped away at the arrogance they had carried here. Finally, only Vaughn remained. Silas watched him closely. Out of all of them, Vaughn was the most prideful. The one who could spark another conflict if pushed wrong. The one whose confession mattered most. Dakota stepped in front of him. "Speak." Vaughn lifted his chin. "No." A quiet ripple passed through the warriors, like a subtle shift in the wind. Dakota remained unmoved. "You will speak." Vaughn's jaw tightened. "I don't regret a damn thing. This land's worth money. He wasn't using it right. I was taking an opportunity. That's all. Silas exhaled slowly. So this was the truth hidden beneath Vaughn's anger, pure greed. No vendetta. No principle. Just a man who wanted more than he earned. Dakota regarded Vaughn with sharp, piercing eyes. Then say it plainly. Speak the greed you hide. A long, tense pause. And finally, through gritted teeth, Vaughn forced the words out. I wanted the land. For myself. And I didn't care who I had to hurt to get it. Silas felt those words like a stone thrown into his chest. But he also felt something else, closure. Vaughn had never spoken honestly before. Not once. Dakota nodded. The truth is spoken. The shame begins. The warriors stepped back, forming a path leading to the forest. The night faded slowly into a pale gray morning as the riders sat around the dying fire, barely able to lift their heads. None of them had slept. The weight of Dakota's judgment hung over them like a thick fog. Every crackle of the remaining embers sounded like another reminder of what was coming. Dakota stepped into the circle without warning. His presence alone forced the riders upright. You will walk at first light, he said. Your words will be your burden. His calm tone made the sentence even heavier. Silas watched from the porch, arms folded, face unreadable. The Cherokee mark behind him still caught the weak morning light, a quiet reminder of why the warriors were here. Vaughn met Silas's gaze for a moment, then quickly looked away. The man who once rode with swagger now struggled to keep his shoulders from trembling. The riders were ordered to repair the last of the damage before leaving. Their movements were clumsy, slowed by exhaustion and dread. Silas walked over and silently handed one of them a tool. No anger, no pride. Just a simple message. Finish it. Dakota inspected their work with a slow, deliberate nod. It is enough, he said. The riders exchanged anxious glances. They knew the hardest part still lay ahead. When the sun finally broke over the hills, Dakota motioned for them to line up. Warriors formed around them like a living wall. Vaughn swallowed hard. We really doing this? He asked under his breath. Yes, Dakota replied. Truth must be carried. Silas stepped closer. You'll head to Red Hollow first. People gather early there. His voice wasn't cruel, just firm, final. The riders turned toward the trail, fear tightening every step. The warriors followed in steady silence. And as they crossed the edge of Silas's land, Vaughn allowed himself one last look back. Silas stood with the rising sun behind him, calm and unmoving. There was no malice in the old man's expression, only the quiet weight of justice. Hours passed, marked only by the occasional pop of the firewood and the steady breathing of the warriors on watch. The moon had risen high, bathing the field in pale silver light. The riders looked smaller, now shrunken by exhaustion, by fear, by the oppressive presence of responsibility they had never felt before. Silas remained awake, though his body longed for rest. Something told him this night wasn't meant to be easy for anyone, not even him. He moved quietly across the porch and settled on a wooden chair, eyes drifting toward the fire. One of the riders finally broke the silence. I can't do this, he whispered hoarsely. His voice cracked, trembling under years of bravado collapsing at once. I can't go to the trading posts. People will laugh us out of the county, another rider hissed, better laughter than retaliation. They'll follow us if we lie. You saw the way they appeared like shadows coming alive. Vaughn stared into the flames, face tense, shadows dancing across the hard lines of his jaw. You're all acting like children, he muttered, though even he sounded drained. We'll give the speech. It's just words. You didn't say any of it like you meant it, one rider snapped back. You still think you're in the right. Silas listened closely, surprised at the sudden honesty among the group. Conflict within a gang wasn't unusual, but this was different. This was guilt trying to claw its way out. Dakota, seated across the clearing, finally rose and walked toward them. Every warrior shifted with him, but not aggressively, more like a wave following a moon's pull. Dakota stopped at the edge of the firelight. "Words shape the world around you," he said. "If you speak them without truth, they break. If you speak them with honesty, they heal." Vaughn scoffed. "Easy for you to say." Dakota approached him slowly, and the fire lit his face with a warm orange glow. "You believe shame is your enemy. You are wrong. Shame is your guide when you have lost your way." Silas watched Vaughn's eyes flicker. The man was fighting something internal: pride, most likely. Pride was poison when a man had nothing else left. "You think we're evil?" Vaughn muttered, not lifting his head. Dakota knelt so he was level with him. "No, I think you are lost." The clearing fell still. "You want land, wealth, control." Dakota continued, voice soft but unyielding. "But you take without understanding the cost. That is the path of a man who does not know himself." Vaughn's throat bobbed. He blinked rapidly, as if something inside him cracked. Silas noticed. Everyone noticed. The flames snapped loudly, as if emphasizing the moment. Dakota stood, addressing all 5 riders. "Tonight, you sit in the presence of the spirits of this land. They see your hearts clearly. Some of you feel fear. Some feel regret. Some feel anger. But all of you feel truth beginning to seep in." None of the riders argued. Dakota's voice dropped to a low, resonant tone. Dawn rolled over the hills in soft layers of gold, touching Silas's ranch with the kind of quiet that follows a long storm. The riders had barely slept. Their faces were pale, hollow, stripped of the arrogance they carried just a day earlier. Even their horses sensed the tension, stamping the ground as the morning air cooled. Dakota stepped into the clearing as the sun climbed higher, his presence instantly commanding. "It is time," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Stand." The riders obeyed without argument. Vaughn rose the slowest, rubbing a hand across his face, looking like a man bracing for a weight he could no longer push away. Silas stepped off the porch and approached them with a steady, measured stride. "You'll head east first," Silas told them. "Red Hollow Trading Post. Folks gather early there." His tone wasn't cruel, just final. One of the younger riders swallowed hard. "Everyone's gonna hear it." Silas didn't soften. "That's the point." Dakota motioned for the warriors to form a loose line around the gang. Not close enough to threaten, just close enough to remind them the judgment was real. The procession began moving across the field, boots crunching on frost-touched grass. Silas watched them go, feeling a strange ache in his chest. Justice mattered, but watching broken men walk toward their humiliation carried its own heaviness. As they neared the edge of the woods, Vaughn turned back. For the first time, there was no hatred in his eyes, only recognition. Silas gave a small nod. Vaughn hesitated, then returned the gesture before disappearing into the trees. The trail to Red Hollow stretched long and winding, lined with tall grass whispering in the breeze. Birds darted overhead. The riders walked in silence, feeling the land pressing around them, not as something to claim, but as something ancient that remembered every step, every trespass. Dakota walked at the front, expression unreadable. "When you speak," he said, not turning, "speak truth. Truth carries farther than pride." "No lies," one rider muttered, voice cracking. The group reached the dusty road leading into Red Hollow. The trading post was waking to life, voices, clattering crates, early shoppers moving between wagons. As the riders came into view, escorted by Cherokee warriors, conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. The air grew still. Fear tightened the riders' shoulders. This was the moment they had dreaded. Dakota raised his hand for silence. "It is time," he said. The Red Hollow Trading Post was already alive with noise when the riders stepped into the open square. Merchants unpacked crates, travelers ate breakfast on wooden benches, and farmers argued over prices. But the moment Vaughn's gang appeared flanked by Cherokee warriors, the entire post froze. Conversations cut off. A few men stood from their seats. Women pulled children closer. The sight was impossible to ignore. 5 beaten, exhausted riders escorted like prisoners by warriors whose presence radiated ancient authority. Dakota stepped forward, lifting a hand. Silence fell instantly. "These men will speak their truth," he said. "You will listen." The youngest rider was pushed gently toward the front. His hands trembled so badly he had to clench them into fists. We trespassed on Silas Brennan's land," he said, voice cracking. "We broke his fence, scared his animals, and threatened him." A ripple of murmurs rolled through the crowd. Another rider stepped forward, then another. Each confession was worse than the last. Pride drained from them with every word. Dust floated in the still morning air as if the land itself were holding its breath. Finally, Vaughn moved ahead. People leaned in. Everyone knew him, some feared him, some respected him. Others watched him with the kind of fascination reserved for men who lived too close to the edge. Vaughn removed his hat slowly. "I went after Silas's land," he said. "I wanted it. Didn't care who I hurt." He swallowed. "Told my men it was just business. But it was greed and stupidity." His voice wavered, but he didn't stop. "I thought a man alone was a man I could break." He lifted his eyes, meeting the crowd's gaze. "I was wrong." Silence followed, heavy, undeniable. Dakota stepped beside him. "Truth has been carried," he declared. "The debt is closed." The warriors bowed their heads in a single solemn gesture, then stepped back. The crowd didn't cheer, didn't mock, no one dared. The moment was too raw, too real. The riders turned and walked away from the trading post, their reputations shattered but their burden lifted. The Cherokee did not follow them. The lesson had already been delivered. Dakota and his warriors began the quiet journey back toward Silas's ranch. When they emerged from the trail, Silas was already waiting on the porch. Dakota placed a hand over his heart. Balance restored. Silas nodded, feeling the truth of the words in his chest. "Thanks to all of you." "No," Dakota said. "Thanks to the bond Alara made. You were never alone." The warriors departed, fading into the landscapes as softly as they had appeared. Silas watched them until the last shadow vanished beyond the hills. Peace settled over the ranch, deep, steady, final. The Cherokee mark on his door caught the sunlight, not as a warning, but as a promise. Silas stepped inside his home, the land quiet and whole once more. He was alone, but he would never be unprotected again.